Today we're going to be learning about the forearm, the anterior compartment. Now, when students usually get to the forearm, it can get a little scary. And that's why I'm here to try to lay this out in a nice, easy way so that everybody can kind of understand and learn what's going on. So we'll kick it off with the anterior compartment. There's two compartments of the forearm, anterior and posterior, with respect to anatomic position. So we'll go over the front. The way I remember this is the numbers 4, 1, 3. That's why it's big and bolded here. There's 3 layers to the anterior compartment. There's the superficial layer, the middle layer, and the deep layer. Okay? The superficial layer contains 4 muscles. That's why there's the 4. And I remember them by just the letters PF, PF. Okay? And we start this off and we have pronator teres, flexor carpi radialis is your F, palmaris longus, next P, and flexor carpi ulnaris. Moving on to the middle layer, which has only 1 muscle, that's because of our 1, is our flexor digitorum superficialis. Okay? And then our deep layer has 3 muscles in it, flexor digitorum profundus, flexor pollicis longus, and the pronator quadratus. And we'll go over those muscles in depth in the later part of the video here. I did want to talk about this nerve sandwich going on here in the forearm as well. So here I have an illustration of the flexor digitorum superficialis, which lays superficial or above the flexor digitorum profundus. Now, one of the main nerves that innervates the anterior compartment of the forearm is the median nerve, which is depicted right here by MN. So you can see how the median nerve courses and travels right under the flexor digitorum superficialis, but above the flexor digitorum profundus. Now, a key thing here is that there's this nerve called the anterior interosseous nerve, named appropriately as it sits right on top of the interosseous membrane of the radius and the ulna, which branches off. It's a branch of the median nerve, and it branches off just before it dives in between the 2 flexor digitorums here, and it actually goes under the flexor digitorum profundus to innervate these 3 muscles of the deep layer. Okay. Also, we do have to kind of talk about the hand, because a lot of the wrist muscles and the forearm muscles cross the wrist, go into the hand, and produce wrist and finger motions. So to understand the actions, we have to cover the joints of the hand. So down here we have our carpals. The next set of bones here is called the metacarpals, which is located in the deep part of your hand right here. And then the next part is their fingers here. Fingers number 1 is the thumb, 5 is the pinky. The thumb only has 2 phalanges, the proximal and the distal. So it only has an IP or an interphalangeal joint. Okay. The rest of the fingers have 3 bones. These are the proximal, the middle, and the distal phalanges. In between the metacarpal and the proximal phalanges, called the MCP, or the metacarpal phalangeal joint. In between the proximal and the middle is called the proximal interphalangeal joint, which is right there. And then the DIP is called the distal interphalangeal joint, which is that last joint right there. So we'll dive into the muscles here. And so I did want to mention, this is the brachioradialis right here. This muscle kind of divides the anterior compartment from the posterior compartment. We're not going to talk about it today, just because we'll talk about it in the next video, as it is kind of mainly related to the posterior compartment. So we're going to go ahead and hide the brachioradialis. And it serves as the split point. So let's move on to this side. So here's our anterior compartment of the forearm. So we'll start with the superficial layer, the 4, the PF. First P up on our list is pronator teres. So pronator teres up here, attaching from the medial epicondyle, the humerus, down over here to the radius, and is responsible for pronation and turning your palm towards the floor, and innervated by the median nerve. So we can kind of visualize how that kind of wraps around there and is available and does the twisting of the forearm. So we can go ahead and hide this one. Our next muscle here is our flexor carpi radialis, Latin for flexing the wrist on the radial side. And so we can see it starts on the medial epicondyle, sends a tendon all the way down to attach down here to mainly like the base of the second metacarpal of the hand. And is responsible for flexing the wrist and radial deviation, which is tilting your hand towards your radial side. Ulnar deviation is the other way. So we can go ahead and hide that one. Next muscle up here would be our palmaris longus. So we have another one attaching to the medial epicondyle. This is also known as the common flexor tendon of these 4 muscles that we're going to cover for the superficial layer. Sends a tendon all the way down to the hand to the palmar aponeurosis right here, which is responsible for stability of the whole entire hand and helps with flexing the hand. and also innervated by the median nerve. So we can go ahead and hide that one. And then our last one in the superficial layer that we talked about is the flexor carpi ulnaris. We can better visualize that kind of almost on the back, but still considered part of the anterior compartment. Flexing the wrist on the ulnar side is his job, and sends a tendon down here to the pisiform and the hook of the hamate as far as carpals go, because it does have to cross the wrist joint in order to flex it. And this is our first one that's not innervated by the median nerve, it's innervated by the ulnar nerve. All right, go ahead and hide this one. Now moving on to our layer, or middle layer now, is our one muscle right here. It's very broad. So this is the flexor digitorum superficialis. And so for the flexor digitorum superficialis, it originates kind of up here along that radial side, and then it sends 4 tendons down through the carpal tunnel, down to the fingers, and they have split tendons, and we can kind of see here, these tendons split into a Y formation right here. And they attach right here in the base of the middle phalanx to flex the PIP, or the proximal interphalangeal joint, which is this joint right here. And it flexes that joint of all fingers 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. Innervated by the median nerve. All right, go ahead and hide this one. And then we're moving on to our deep layer of the forearm here. So our first large muscle is right here, the flexor digitorum profundus. This one is going to be sending a tendon all the way down to the base of the distal phalanx down here. And it actually goes in between the 2 split portion of the flexor digitorum superficialis, known as the Camper's fascia. And it goes down to attach at the base of the distal phalanx to flex the DIP, which is this joint right here, of digits 2, 3, 4, and 5. So that is our flexor digitorum profundus. This is our first muscle that is actually dual innervated. So for digits 2 and 3, the pointer finger and the middle finger, it is innervated by the anterior interosseous nerve. And then digits 4 and 5, the ring finger and the pinky finger, it's innervated by the ulnar nerve, motor-wise. All right, hiding this one here, we can move on to our next muscle, is the flexor pollicis longus. And we can see here how the flexor pollicis longus sends a tendon down here to attach, pollicis, Latin for thumb, coming down to attach to the base of the distal phalanx of the thumb here, responsible for flexing the interphalangeal joint, or the IP joint of the thumb. All right, hiding that one here. And then our last muscle we're going to cover today is this little small guy, pronator quadratus. He assists the pronator teres that we talked about earlier in pronating, or turning your palm towards the ground, of the wrist, and is one of the primary stabilizers of the distal radial ulnar joint, also innervated by the anterior interosseous nerve. So now that we've kind of covered all of the muscles, I do want to I'll throw up for you guys all the nerve and all the muscles that are innervated by that nerve. I'll throw up like a little chart for you, so you can have that just for your reference. Unfortunately, we can see a couple of them. We can see the ulnar nerve coursing through, that's the medial antebrachial, we'll go over that later. Ulnar nerve, which right here, makes sense why it innervates the flexor carpi ulnaris and the ulnar side of the flexor digitorum profundus as it runs right by it. And then we can also visualize the median nerve, which is right here, which innervates most of the anterior compartment of the forearm, like we talked about. This program, unfortunately, does not depict the anterior interosseous nerve, but just know, like we talked about the sandwich, the anterior interosseous nerve is a branch of the median nerve that branches off and then goes underneath the flexor digitorum profundus to innervate the flexor digitorum profundus, the pronator quadratus, and the flexor pollicis longus. So just keep that in mind, as it's not depicted here, but it is a nerve that we should be aware of. And those are all the muscles of the anterior compartment of the forearm. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any comments, feel free to leave it down below. I am the PT guy, educating you on God's wonderful creations. I'll see you in the next one.